Friends, welcome to the 98th session of Legal Empowerment through Interaction Lecture Series. We are nearing our century. We are happy that within a day or so we'll be hitting our 100th mark. Today, we are privileged to have Justice Ramkumar, Justice Abraham Matthew, Professor Dr. Kaul, and all you wonderful participants. A topic which is seldom touched upon, which is always hushed or brushed under the carpet. We are trying to have a critical and constructive evaluation of a very contemporary and very relevant topic. It is not to criticize or it is not to find fault with anything. It's only a fact analysis so that all the stakeholders can put their heads together and try to improve the system. To introduce the topic, we have Justice Abraham Matthew, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Sham. Respected Ramkumar sir, Dr. Kaul, Mr. Sham, dear friends. Today's topic is of contemporaneous relevance, no doubt about it. And it is a ticklish issue also, actually. So I have reminded myself that I should be very careful in my words. I have nothing in my mind, any recent development. I don't want to connect anything with it. Okay. But what is this backbone of independent judiciary? We all know that. Confidence of the people is the backbone of independent judiciary. But unless judges respect the courts, how can we expect others to do it? So that takes us to the question, how can judges respect the courts? The simple answer is by doing nothing which is unbecoming of a judge. Discipline is the essential thing that is expected of a judge. But discipline in what? We can identify 5 areas. One, his relationship with the members of the legal profession. Second, relationship with the members of his family. The third, a relationship with others. Then the fourth is self-discipline. And the last is discipline in judicial matters. Judicial matters. Now coming to the first item, that is a relationship with the legal profession. Members of the legal profession. Say, judges have started mingling with the advocates. They are ready to accept any invitations extended by individual lawyers. They are entertained by lawyers in luxury hotels. I don't want to cite any incident. But I have to mention one thing. This happened a few decades ago also. Justice Gajendra Gadkar, former judge of the Supreme Court, has mentioned such incidents in his book, To the Best of My Memory. An advocate should act as a corrective force, or the lawyer community should act as a corrective force. When they criticize judges, bona fide, they should not be proceeded against under the Contempt of Court Act. But if the allegations are wanton, okay, there is nothing wrong in it. But so long as they are not wanton allegations, there is some bona fides in it. I don't think that it is good for the judiciary that the advocate or anyone else is proceed against under the Contempt of Court Act. But it may happen sometimes. Okay. Then coming to the second area, judges should not allow their family members to get themselves involved in any matter pending in the courts. Anyway, I think this is not an area where much discussion will be necessary for us. Now coming to the third area, again judges have started mingling with the public. A certain degree of aloofness or isolation is a must for judges. They should maintain decorum in their social behavior. That's all what I want to mention about that. Now coming to the fourth one, self-discipline. This is very important. Judges should conduct themselves in a most appreciable manner. The fifth one is discipline in judicial matters. this may be a subject which is or this is a subject which is not much discussed. Now the present generation in the legal profession does not understand what a dissenting judgment is. Now we have a different culture, a culture different from the earlier culture. We have developed a culture called agree culture. A-G-R-E-E-C-U-L-T-I-U-R-A. So the judges say that we agree. All the judges say that we agree. There is no dissenting judgment we can see. There are judges who do not even read the judgments written by his fellow judges on the bench. They just subscribe their signatures to it even without reading it. So there are some judges who do not follow precedents. Some judges who do not even examine precedents. See, if you go through the judgments of the Supreme Court nowadays, the last 10 years, you just go through the judgments of the Supreme Court, we can notice one thing. No judgments of the Supreme Court or High Courts are discussed. They think that it is not proper for the Supreme Courts to discuss or analyze the judgments of the High Courts. It was not so, at least until 1970s. Now, these judges believe that they are very competent, or they are more competent than others. There have been instances where the court has constituted benches to examine correctness of a bench which is equal to the strength of the same judge, the same bench. So co-equal strength. A judgment of a three-judge bench is examined by another three-judge bench. This is unheard of, but this happens nowadays. Now, the last one is media publicity. Publicity in media is a weakness for some. And I know the media projecting a judge as a brave judge, an impartial judge. Many of whose judgments are per incuriam. Many of his judgments are per incuriam. But such judges actually what they do, they play to the tune of gallery. So this has become a fashion now. Then existence of some judges is known to the world through their comments on the bench. A judge should live through their judgments, not through the comments made on the bench. And we have had a judge in Bombay High Court. I remember reading it when I was an LLB student in Bombay. This judge stopped reading newspaper the moment he was sworn in as a High Court judge. That is judge of the judge of the High Court in Bombay. So that was long years ago. Now gone are those days. It is true that the devil has started dancing in the society. Everywhere it is wickedness, cruelty, mischief, everything. But a judge should not join that society. He should be like a lotus, living in a muck and without being touched by it. Actually, nothing gets attached to that lotus. No muck gets attached to that lotus. So a judge should not ignore, or judge should ignore such muckrakers. The judges should not respond, or that was a tradition, that was a culture we had in India. Judges do not respond to any criticism in the media. But nowadays we have started responding to such criticism also. I don't think that it is advisable. The reason, I don't know, I don't want to mention it, I don't want to discuss because the Professor Kaul, who is more competent than me in this matter, is here. Then there is no law governing these areas. Judges are governed by self-imposed rules or discipline that is being observed by them for decades or through centuries, we can say. So some attempts were made to make a code or issue some guidelines. The first was in 1997, where the Supreme Court issued guidelines for the conduct of judges. That was called a charter. That is the restatement of values of judicial life. This was ratified by all the high courts at a conference of the Chief Justices of all the High Courts of India. But the Bangalore Principles of Judicial Conduct 2002 was followed. But they have become waste papers now. They have become waste papers. The reason I don't want to discuss here because Professor Cole is there. So these are the areas we can identify in these matters when we speak about this judicial life. Now I think we have reached the stage where the fences have started enjoying this harvest. The fence has started enjoying the harvest. So what is the solution for it? Is there anything wrong with the appointment of judges? Is there anything wrong in appointing advocates or other persons who have political allegiance to a particular party? Is there anything wrong in appointing persons who have overzealous or who are overzealous in their religious matters? These are all matters which can be looked into at this stage. These are all problems we are facing now. Some judgments we can say that this judge will pronounce a judgment of this type only. That is true. We cannot find fault with the media, or we cannot fault with any the public also. When a judge, when an advocate or other person criticizes a judge or a court for such wrongdoings, I think the Supreme Court and the Indian judiciary should listen to it, or at least they should not be proceeded against under the Contempt of Court Act. At least we can do it. So this is the right time for us to discuss these matters. Professor Cole, he is very competent. He headed this Judicial Academy, Delhi, and he is a practicing advocate. He was a professor in law. I think in all these departments of this in this law, he has gained experience. Welcome, Dr. Cole. We are eager to listen to you. Okay, welcome, Dr. Cole.
Thank you, Justice Abraham Matthew.
Wonderful, Abraham Matthew. Wonderful. Well said.
Justice Ram Kumar, Mr. Shyam Param, and Mr. Menon, and my young friends in the audience. I'm just only an initiator in the discussion. I'm not going to talk anything which you do not know. I am going only to say the judges should be known by their judgments. I can classify judges into 3 categories. One is a judge who decides to be a status quo judge and therefore goes only by what we call as the rule of literal interpretation of statutes. Second is a judge who is an active judge, finishes his board quickly, and then does other good things to find a good career even beyond judgeship. But then there's a judge whom I call proactive judge. A judge who keeps himself abreast not only with the law in the statute, but also keeps himself abreast with all the legal precepts which are in the form of rules or which are in the form of what I call as judicial standards. Now we know judicial standards, as we refer to them, is impartiality, neutrality, honesty, independence, rule of law follower, equality, upholder, and deciding the cases in accordance with law. But the law is not only what we call as the statutory law. Law is beyond that, and that is why we say when we talk about judicial standards in the wider sense, and this is what my whole discussion is all about, we include legal precepts of non-legislative origin or undefined legislative precepts used by judges which are used for deciding cases. And if we remember cases of 18th century or 19th century and still refer to those cases, there must be something extraordinary in those cases, that we should be referring to those cases in when we are in the 21st century. Now, how do those cases distinguish themselves from the cases that we every day read, write, and study? Now, that is my today's discussion. Judicial standards are not only that you must be impartial, you must be independent, you must decide in accordance with law, you must be upholder of the rule of law, you must be a dispenser of justice. Because ultimately, what is important for a judge is he able to dispense the justice, and justice in its true sense of the term. For this purpose, I would say that in every legal system, there are large number of legal precepts with different sources of origin, used by judges to arrive at fair outcome of a dispute. I am talking about fair and just outcome of a dispute. That is why Roscoe Pound finds two characteristics of legal precepts. I will just give a foundation of what I am going to talk to you. Then I will illustrate it with number of cases. And that is what my sum and substance of today's presentation is. What are the judicial standards which the judges must, in order to do justice, use and use quite often if they have to be proactive judges. Roscoe Pound says two important characteristics. One, those precepts which are imperative. Now, imperative precepts are those which are made under the authority of a legislature, or statutory enactments, or delegated legislation of discussion, call them as rules. So any law which is statutory in character, we call it as rule. And those precepts which are traditional, habitual or customary. Now you must know the source of environmental law today has been what we call as customary international law. Polluter pays is a principle that is talked about in the customary international law. Similarly, traditional and ideal precepts are incorporated in judicial decision or accepted as a part of the judicial process, which will be called as standards. And that is what I refer to as judicial standards. Now, standards are being used in larger contexts. Some of them can be what we call them as principles. Some of them can be what we call as doctrines. Some of them we can call as policies, whatever you would like to call them, but they are not legislative in nature. They are to be distinguished from imperative precepts. Traditional precepts are those, and this is very important, which originate in social morality or part of people's way of life. And the third precept which I would like to introduce is what we call as ideal or just. And that precept is which relates to the constituency of justice and fair play, socio-economic political justice. Now, it's an ideal legal percept. Living wage, Article 43 of the Constitution, it is an ideal percept. Now, let me go second stage, which is very important for us to understand, is what is the difference between rules and standards. Now, rules are legislative. Standards are non-legislative, legal percepts, or which are not defined in legislation. And the examples that I can give are like reasonability. The examples of these can be further given in the form of due process. Example can be given rule of law. Example can be given rules of natural justice. Examples can be given of strict liability. Examples can be given of fair trial. Example can be given of speedy trial. Now, these are concepts which have not been defined and are defined case-to-case basis. And if we try to understand, even if the legislature uses these words, like Article 19 uses the word reasonable restrictions. Now, those are undefined legal percepts. Even though they are part of the Constitution, but they are not defined. And therefore, those are where you have to bring in what we call them as legal standards. Judicial standards have to evolve these concepts. And that is where, when Indian Constitution was being framed, Justice Frankfurter advised our constitution makers. He said, make a detailed constitution, leave very little scope for judicial review. Try to do as elaborate a constitution as you can. But then you see, when you talk about freedom of speech, what do you mean by freedom of speech? When you talk about liberty, when you talk about personal liberty, what do you mean by personal liberty? That is why, again, you have to go back to the Supreme Court and tell Supreme Court has to define. And that is where the Supreme Court every day has to deal with new manifestations, new facets of the personal liberty. And we have an umbrella of rights which have come under the tree of life and personal liberty. The life, dignity, not animal existence, not this kind of this good environment is a part of the right to life, right to personal liberty. So therefore, these are very wide terms. Therefore, these have to be evolved through judicial standards only. Therefore, the judges have a very important role to play, how to define these undefined terms. And those have to come by judicial standards only. That is why I would like to say legislative enactments or percepts are made under the authority of legislature are called rules. Standards are neither made by the legislature nor explained by the legislature, and discretion may be given to the courts to define and apply them according to the circumstances of the case. I'll come to the specific cases and explain these concepts very thoroughly. But just to tell you what is the distinction between rules and standards. And when I say standards, judicial standards include principles, include doctrines, include maxims, include principles, and further whatever you like to call, say, policies also. Rules are made, and this is very important. Rules are made by a competent legislature, while as standards are evolved. Standards are not made, standards are evolved. Their scope may be widened or narrowed, or may be abundant according to the changed situations. Now we'll come to from fault liability to strict liability to absolute liability. Now you can see the concept evolving from fault liability to strict liability to absolute liability when we come to Relin versus Fletcher's case. And when we talk about absolute liability, we say exceptions to the Relin versus Fletcher do not apply. Inherently dangerous things. And that is Bhopal gas tragedy. That is oleum leak case in Shriram Chemicals factory. That is MC Mehta versus Union of India. We'll come to these. Then rules are precisely stated. Now, when a statute defines, a legislation is given, rules are defined precisely. While as standards are stated broadly and they are flexible, elastic to fit in different situations. Rules are applied in their entirety when they are applicable to a given case. They may or may not be applicable. If they are applicable in their entirety. Application of standards are discretionary. A judge may like to go by literal rule of construction only, but a judge may not go by the literal rule of construction only. He'll go by what we call as mischief rule of construction of statutes. I am reminded of RMDC versus Union of India, where the Supreme Court said, referring to Maxwell on interpretation of statutes, literal rule is at best a prima facie rule. But to arrive at the true intent of the legislature, you have to ask the 4 questions to yourself. What was the law before? What was the mischief that existed where there was no remedy? What is the remedy provided by the law? And what is the true reason of the remedy? And apply the rule of what we call as Hidden's rule of construction of statutes, give effect to the remedy and curb all mischiefs that are foreseeable in that kind of a situation. Now, 4th point that I just want to say, and that's very important, is rules are based on legislative policy. Though the legislators may be influenced by different types of ideologies or social policies, while as standards are influenced by social, economic, political, and religious ideologies. And we will go to Donogh versus Stevenson, where we will see, love thy neighbor, the words of Jesus used by the judge to build up the concept that you cannot, even if when you are not a privy to a contract, you must not injure your neighbor, and therefore you brought in that negligence, that kind of a situation where there is no privity of contract. Now, these are very, very important aspects that I wanted to talk about. Standards are influenced by social, economic, political, and religious ideologies, policies, and may originate in any source, but cannot be called standards. Now, this is the most important thing. The most important thing is they cannot be unless incorporated in a decision of a court of record. They must be followed by the courts at some point of time. And they must owe their, being as a part of the legal percept, because they have been adopted and accepted by the courts. And that is a very important part of this whole process that I am talking to you. And Roscoe Pound said, relating to rules, that they are the bones and sinew of the legal order. And when he was talking about the standards, he said that the law realizes a desirable individualization of application in the province of law in governing conduct of individuals and institutions. Standards are requirement of justice and fair play. Rules are a bony skeleton. Skeleton must have flesh and blood. And most of the times, who supplies that blood, flesh and blood? It is the standards, judicial standards evolved by the courts over the period of time, which gives scope for fair play and justice. And that is why I want to tell you what are the functions of the judicial standards. Now, the functions of the judicial standards are, they tone down the effect of a rule. It produces unfair results. More often than not, will not permit themselves. Now, this is what Ronald Dworkin says. The importance of standards not permit themselves to be used as instruments of iniquity and injustice. Now, let me illustrate the importance of standards and how the judges, lawyers have to read beyond the statute, have to equip themselves with more knowledge, which will become relevant at some point of time in evolving judicial standards. Now, let me take one case, a very old case. That is what I said, cases of 19th century, talked about in 21st century, and have the same importance and logic today also. I'm giving you a case of Court of Appeal of New York, Riggs versus Palmer, RIGGS versus PALMER, 1899 case. Now, in this case, the issue before the court was a very important thing. Whether the heir, that is the grandson, named in the will of his grandfather, could through testamentary succession inherit under that will, even though he had murdered his grandfather to get the benefit on his death. Now, he had murdered his grandfather because he wanted to quickly get that property. Law did not prohibit. There was no disqualification. But should a murderer get the benefit of a will? This was the question before the court. And the court said, it is quite true that statutes regulating the making, proof, and effect of wills and devolution of property, if literally construed, and if their fore and effect can under no way or under no circumstances be controlled or modified, give this property to the murderer. The court further observed that all laws and contracts may be controlled in the operation and effect by the general maxim of the common law. This is one thing which is very important, how the common law maxim becomes important. No one shall be permitted to profit by his own fraud, or to take advantage of his own wrong, or to found any claim upon his own iniquity, or to acquire property of his own crime. As a consequence, the murderer of the grandfather did not inherit any property, notwithstanding the fact that at that time no rule was in force denying inheritance to the murderer. Now, this is the importance of judicial standards. If you had gone by the rules only, if you had gone by the legislative enactment only, then he should have got this property. But should a person get the property for which he does not have right in the equity, who is wanting to get the property because of his own crime, the court said you cannot get it. Now I can tell you a second illustration. A beautiful case, a hypothetical case, but nonetheless a very important case that we must look at. Suppose a rule produces an unjust result in a specific situation. Should we allow that? And should we not bring in some maxim of common law or some other principles into use to see that the injustice is not done in a given situation? Let us take a case. In a swimming competition, A gets the first prize. B, who is the second in the competition, objects to this And his objection is based upon the rule which says the first swimmer who touches the wall of the pool with both hands shall be declared winner. And his contention is that this man touched the wall with only one hand, both hands. And it is found that this man had only one hand and his second hand had been, cut in an accident. And he had participated in this competition with one hand. Now the committee which met, they said, sorry, it says both hands. We cannot give this to you, but we will recommend to the board next time to modify the rule. But Dawkins says, and he is bringing in Lon Fuller's inner morality, and says he could have interpreted the rule in association with the maxim, law cannot make impossible demands. The maxim, law must provide rules that humans are capable of fulfilling. Is part of the concept of inner morality developed by Lon Fuller, and could decide that both means all the hands a swimmer has. He had only one hand, therefore he should have been declared as a winner. The rule did not use the words two, which is enumerative, but the word both, which is inclusive. Therefore, the rule must be interpreted to mean all the hands or the swimmer has. But a judge has the option to decide literally, he may ignore the principle. Now, this is where the choice that the judges, and that is what we say, a judge who is a technocratic judge and a judge who is a proactive judge applies upon the what we call as judicial standards, and which have evolved in the form of what you can call as a standard which could be used. Now, I can now tell you about the Donoghue versus Stevenson's case. Sometimes standards are used neither to apply to a rule or to reinterpret the rule, but to create an exception or supplement the existing standard. Lord Atkin, in the famous case of Donoghue versus Stevenson, relying on the famous saying of the Jesus that love thy neighbor, observed, the rule that you are to love your neighbor becomes in law, you must not injure your neighbor. This is a very beautiful, how you are bringing in adage from religion for development of a standard which is accepted by the courts and becomes a judicial standard. In law, your neighbor is not the only one with whom you have privity of contract, but one whose action adversely affects you. But by this analogy, the manufacturer of the ginger beer is the neighbor of the victim and is under a duty not to injure him. With the help of a biblical parable, Lord Atkin created a new standard in derogation of and to supplement the existing standard of privity of contract. That is how this case becomes so important case, and therefore you don't have to be a privity to the contract. And this is why I said it's very important for us to understand. Standards are flexible and elastic and can be changed with the change in the circumstances. Now, this is very important when we see with the development of the industrial society from the agricultural society, fault liability developed into a strict liability and strict liability into an absolute liability without nullifying the preceding ones. It is quite interesting that though there is a qualitative difference between fault liability on the one hand and strict and absolute on the other, there is not clear visible distinction between the two. And absolute liability is different from the strict liability in as much as former is inherently very dangerous, whereas the later is slightly less. It is merely a difference in the degree that makes the distinction between the two kinds of liabilities. Now, Ryland versus Fletcher was a development over fault liability. We all know about this case. But Indian Supreme Court went further. And this is where I say development of the law, how it takes place, even if we did not have Public Liability Act, which came in 1991. Without a Public Liability Act, Supreme Court in Oleum Gases case, MC Mehta versus Union of India 1987, created a strict liability which was an improvement on the Ryland versus Fletcher rule, because in absolute liability, there is no exception applicable and all exceptions are of no use. And that is why we say in Indian Supreme Court further developed the doctrine of strict liability into an absolute liability to meet the requirement of the modern society, as the strict liability principle did not meet such requirement. This was a situation which arose in Bhopal. New doctrine foreclosed the possible option of sabotage available under the doctrine of strict liability to the defendant in the Bhopal case. The Supreme Court developed the doctrine further in MC Mehta versus Union of India. Now, this is why I say these are concepts which have to be taken into account, because at many places, you have to give meaning to many terms which have been left undefined even in the Constitution of India. Like in Article 26, when you use public order and morality. And these are words which are of wide import. These are words which are ambiguous, and therefore you have to bring in these judicial standards to pronounce upon these principles. And that is why you have to also see how in India, like in England, we have developed certain principles called principles based on equity. Now, if you go to the history of the law of equity, under the UK, when the UK was transforming from agrarian to the commercial society, commercial mode of production, statutory as well as precedents could not keep pace with the needs of the commercial society. There came a gap between law and justice. And this gap between law and justice had to be filled. And these could be filled only through judicial standards in absence of the legislation. And how did they do it? Equity jurisdiction introduced many law reforms in the English legal system and made the system responsive to the needs of the commercial society. One of the most important contributions in the development and reforms of English law is the creation of the maxims of equity. Some of them are, which we can read: he who comes to equity must come with clean hands. Delay defeats equity. Now gave the principle of laches, even in those cases where there were no statutory limitations. Equity will not suffer a wrong to be without a remedy. Equity looks to the substance and not to the form. Now, these are very important aspects that I thought I should take into account. I just want to take you to 2-3 important aspects which have very important bearing when we go to Keshwananda Bharati's case. Where from did the Supreme Court evolve the concept of basic structure and did not define it and let it to be defined in each case whenever it came before the Supreme Court, like rule of law, democracy, secularism. All these concepts are through the judicial standards only that we have come across Supreme Court interpreting basic structure by following what we call as judicial standards in the interpretation of the Constitution. I just want to take up two cases. A very beautiful case which I want to talk to you here. There is a case which came before the Supreme Court. It is called S.R. Chaudhary versus State of Punjab. I consider it to be one of those very hallmark cases where the Supreme Court has evolved judicial standards in deciding a case which the High Court had dismissed at the very outset. It dismissed in limine. Now this was on the interpretation of Article 164(4) of the Constitution. Now let me take you to that case. Now this is a 2001 7 SCC 126. Let me say, the issue before us is, now this was the issue before the court. Can a non-member who fails to get elected during the period of 6 consecutive months after he is appointed as a minister or while a minister has ceased to be a legislator, be reappointed as a minister without being elected to the legislature after the expiry of the first 6 consecutive months? Now, when this case came, it came under 164(4) of the Indian Constitution. A minister who for any period of 6 consecutive months is not a member of the legislature of the state shall be at the expiration of that period cease to be a minister. When this matter was challenged before the Supreme Court, now there was an assembly, a person was appointed as a minister, he did not get elected in 6 months. Before the 6 months would expire, he resigned. There was a change of the government in the same party. New chief minister came. In the life of the same assembly, this man was appointed again by minister by the other person who became the chief minister. This man's appointment was challenged before the High Court of the Punjab and Haryana High Court. The division bench of the High Court void order dismissed the writ petition in limine. The appeal by special leave calls for question the order of the judgment of the High Court dismissing the writ petition in limine. Now the Supreme Court allowed, and in allowing it, the very beautiful way of applying the judicial standards. Now that is where I just want to take you to, is very important for me. The court said, parliamentary democracy envisages representation of people, responsible government, accountability of the Council of Ministers to the legislature. The essence of it is drawn a direct line of authority from the people through the legislature to the executive. The character and content of the parliamentary democracy is the ultimate analysis, depends upon the quality of the persons who man the legislature as representatives of the people. It is said that the elections are the barometers of democracy and the contestants the lifeline of the parliamentary system and its setup. Constitutional provisions are required to be understood and interpreted with the object-oriented approach. A constitution must not be construed in a narrow or pedantic sense. The word used may be general in terms, but their full import and true meaning has to be appreciated, considering the true context in which the same are used and purpose for which they seek to achieve. Debates in the Constituent Assembly and so on. So the very concept of the responsible government and representative democracy signifies government by the people in constitutional terms, it denotes sovereign power which resides in the people is exercised on their behalf by their chosen representative, and for exercise of those powers, representatives are necessarily accountable to the people for what they do. The members of the legislature must therefore own their power directly or indirectly to the people. The members of the state assemblies, like the Lok Sabha, trace their power directly as elected by the people, while the members of the Council of Ministers of Rajya Sabha owe it to the people indirectly, since they are chosen by the representatives of the people. The Council of Ministers, of which the Chief Minister is the head in the state and whose aid and advice government has taken, must therefore owe their power to the people directly or indirectly. And court goes on to say, we therefore are the considered opinion, it would be subverting the constitution to permit an individual who is not a member of the legislature to be appointed a minister repeatedly for a 6 consecutive months without his getting elected in the meanwhile. The practice would therefore be derogative to the constitutional scheme, improper, undemocratic, invalid. 164(4) is at best only in the nature of an exception to the normal rule of only member of the legislature being ministers, restricted to a short period of 6 consecutive months. This exception is essentially required to be used to meet a very extraordinary situation and must be strictly construed and sparingly used. Now, this is how the court has adopted the judicial standards to define this term. Now, I would just like to come to the principles of natural justice. And principles of natural justice are embodiment of judicial standards. And this is most of the rules of natural justice are the result of fair policies pursued by British courts. In the absence of any legislative guidelines, they evolved these rules by invoking ancient scriptures or works of the scholars or of God. The beginning of the rule of ad alteram paratum can be traced to the decision of the Chief Justice Edward Coke of King's Bench, who in many cases drew influence from Magna Carta and insisted on right of hearing. Right of hearing is also traced to the story of Adam and Eve. God forbade. God prohibited Adam and Eve to eat and said, don't eat the apple.
Forbidden fruit.
They did not obey the command of the God. They violated the command of the God and ate the apple. God, howsoever sure he was, did not condemn them without giving them right of hearing. Therefore, the principles of natural justice owe their existence to the story of Adam and Eve. Therefore, the principles of natural justice are judicial standards which have been incorporated in judicial decisions. And even if there is no rule, we read them as part of the statute, implied part of the statute. Therefore, principles of natural justice are the highest judicial standards which are applied. That is why we have, in many cases, Supreme Court reading principles of natural justice of ad alteram paratum, and you read Maneka Gandhi's case. Maneka Gandhi's case was where they said procedure must be just, the law must be just, and due process must be followed, and they evolved another principle, post-decisional hearing. Now, these are principles which are what we call as judicial standards evolved by the courts, and these are the principles which are applied by the courts from time to time, and we must always be conscious of the fact. I would just like to take only 2 cases more before I would say that we can now resume our discussion on this topic, but 2 cases which I want to do. And in the conclusion, I would only then like to say something more than what I have said so far. you see, when 42nd Amendment brought an amendment to Article 311 and took away the second opportunity of being heard, the Supreme Court brought in second opportunity from backdoor. And if you have gone through two cases which I just wanted to talk to you, the two cases are Union of India versus Muhammad Ramzan Khan. These are very, very beautiful things to read. How did the Supreme Court think of it? How did the Supreme Court evolve this principle? Is because Supreme Court went beyond the statute. Supreme Court said, in Muhammad Ramzan Khan, they said, if the disciplinary authority is not the inquiring authority, once the inquiry officer submits his report to the disciplinary authority, the disciplinary authority must make available a copy of the inquiry officer's report to the delinquent employee, and he must have a right to represent against that inquiry officer's report. And if it is not followed, it is violation of principles of natural justice. But later on came the judgment of the Supreme Court in ECIL, Managing Director of ECIL, Hyderabad versus B. Karunakaran. This is 1993 4 SCC 727. The Supreme Court said, and they did not want to go that far as they went in Muhammad Ramzan Khan's case. They said, merely not supplying the copy of the inquiry officer will not be violation of principles of natural justice. If denial of this copy would cause a prejudice to the employee, of principles of natural justice. Muhammad Ramzan Khan is 1991 1 SCC 588 and ECIL versus Karunakaran is 1993 4 SCC 727. It's a constitution bench judgment. And the Supreme Court said this principle will apply to both public sector, government sector and private sector employees. Now, another example of judicial standards is Article 21, where you read fair trial. Now, fair trial is Zahira Sheikh. Active participation by the presiding judge. Legal representation to the lawyer. Speedy trial. Now, these are the principles which have been evolved by adopting varied judicial standards. And these have played a very important role because courts have in many cases quashed the proceedings because they amounted to denial of. The other day, there's a judgment of the Supreme Court on 313 under the CRPC, where they say once a person in the statement in 313 creates a doubt, you just have to create a doubt, then the prosecution job is to prove it to the hilt. The evidence must be beyond reasonable doubt. Now, these are principles and doctrines which have been evolved. Now, let me come to the conclusion of what I said. I said a proactive judge does not confine himself only to the legislative precepts. legal precepts incorporated in the legislation. In fact, all common law developments that have taken place, those are primarily because of the judicial standards. Those are non-legislative precepts, or those are the precepts which have been undefined legislative precepts. So therefore, the material that is available to a judge is not only the legislation, but to do complete justice and fairness in a given case, and to see that the statutory provisions, if they result in injustice, they are equaled by adopting the judicial standards. But what it requires is, it requires quite enough of knowledge on the part of the lawyer, on the part of the judge, and therefore this is where all the stakeholders must have that capacity, must have that competence, must have those commitments, must have that integrity to do complete justice in the matters. But at the same time, we have to be cautious that these judicial standards are not overstretched. These judicial standards are used absolutely where they are necessary to do complete justice in the matter. I think I have started the discussion on this topic. I think we can now take up the questions on this topic. Thank you.
Definitely, sir. Before that, there was a speaker who had addressed the first ever convocation that was done outside the High Court premises, in Calicut Court premises, in connection with this bicentenary celebration. So during the talk, when somebody put a query regarding judges, he said there are good judges, and he just paused. So everybody was expecting to hear something going to happen. It was just like hearing your speech, sir. He said there are good judges and very good judges. Our endeavor should be to make the judges very good judges.
Very good judges. Yeah.
very diplomatically put, sir. I mean, wonderful. Over to you, Ramkumar, sir.
Dr. Gaur, excellent, as is usual with you. Excellent lecture. I am reminded of a saying of Justice Krishna Iyer while interpreting a law. He said, don't interpret the law in cold print. You find out the soul behind the law. Otherwise, the justice will be a prisoner of law.
Yeah. Right.
Great words. Again, when an advocate was being appointed as a judicial officer, Justice Krishna once remarked, once an advocate is appointed as a judicial officer, he is vaccinated against all legal information, subsequent information. So I used to tell my trainees in the Judicial Academy, such stagnation should not happen to you. You should always keep yourself abreast of the requirements, legal requirements. Another judicial officer once remarked, with every judgment, a judge gets one sure enemy. One sure enemy.
Yeah.
Who is the one who succeeds? Who loses. And a doubtful friend. The person who succeeds need not be your friend. He can only be a doubtful friend. But it was all taken in a very, very sporting way by another district judge who was subsequently elevated to High Court, and he has retired also. He used to say, as a district judge, that if my judgments are affirmed by the High Court, I am happy because I was able to do justice in advance. If my judgments are, on the contrary, reversed, I am happier because my illegality was not perpetrated. That should be the mindset to be evolved by every judicial officer. I used to say that. Anyway, we have seen judges and judges. Anyway, the courteous behavior by judges towards accused. I have seen from my experience, I am saying, very often judges, many judges, not all, many judges look at the accused as a most despicable person standing in the dock. I am mentioning about the trial courts. Judge looks at him as a despicable person. See, he is insulated by the presumption of innocence. Until and unless he is found guilty, he is
Yes.
to be presumed innocent. But we very often forget that. It's all media hypes have got a very tremendous role on that, because media nowadays convict a person. They virtually convict. What remains is only sentence. Media virtually convicts a person. Now it is high time that they were controlling. In fact, in Dr. Anand's case, Supreme Court said every chief judge, the chief judges of every high court, should intervene and take notice, take cognizance of such media excesses. Otherwise, justice will be derailed. But I am yet to see a chief justice of any high court interfering in such media excesses. What all things we are hearing every day? They don't seem to be governed by the presumption of innocence. They are not concerned about that. The moment an FIR is registered against a person, you find so many crime stories, etc. in all local channels.
Yes.
It is worse in our state.
They are
in Kerala.
investigators, prosecutors, and judges in the media trial.
Exactly.
Arnab Goswami is every day.
Deplorable.
Every day.
And my advice to judicial officers used to be that they should be very courteous to fellow judicial officers, fellow advocates, even to the court staff, even to the accused, who is insulated by the presumption of innocence. You have touched this subject very, very beautifully. Wonderful lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Yes, Ramashan sir.
I joined in the middle. Anyhow, the subject is a very interesting one. But as far as the evolving judicial principles are concerned, High Court and Supreme Court having the plenary powers, where they can go to any extent and where there is any gap in the legislation for the purpose of filling up the gaps to advance justice. Probably they may be able to extend that jurisdiction till a new legislation is enacted for that purpose, because that is how the ragging case, the guidelines were given in ragging case, and also in cases where the damage to public property, even the state legislatures were not prepared to legislate a law. Then they said the rules have been framed by the Supreme Court and say making the person who calling for the Bandh or Hartal will be responsible for payment of any loss caused to the public property and also private property. And it is for them to prove that they have taken all reasonable costs, because you cannot burden the person who sustained loss for that purpose. So all those things will be possible when the constitutional courts are having that power. How far? Because we are also trying to import that powers to the judicial officers in the National Judicial Academy. I do not know how far it will be fruitful, because to some extent, because my senior because when I became a district judge, my senior said that you can't expect, even as a subordinate officer, law for everything. There may be occasions comes where you will have to apply the principles of justice and see that you will have to interpret the law in such a way within the four corners and bring and try to provide relief to the extent possible, because he said that you don't go beyond that four corners, but you will have to be within that limit and you will have to do it, which powers may be possible for the subordinate judicials. Also what my senior used to remind when I joined the bench, I can say. So that is how we will have to train the judicial officers also, that merely because saying there are some decisions, obsessed by decisions. And they said that, because my senior used to say, whenever I used to discuss the cases with him, I will say there is a decision already, what is the purpose of arguing the case? Then he said, you are not fit to be a lawyer, you can be fit to be a judge. Because you are an obedient person of following the principle of stare decisis and apply the principle and decide the case. You are not expected to do that. So that is the way in which some of the seniors used to groom the juniors. So that is how you develop the attitude of critical analysis of the situation and apply the law and give the relief as far as possible. That must be the way in which the officers will have to work. And another thing, the same way I think that it is appropriate at this stage to say, even in the environmental jurisdiction.
Ratla municipality was the SDM.
Not only that, the principle of public doctrine of public trust has been evolved by the Supreme Court for the purpose of protecting environment. They say it is not only for you to enjoy, but for others also to enjoy.
Yes.
Coming generation has to go.
And that's a part of the customary international law.
No, they imported because there is no law available here. They imported the international covenant, say being the part of the signatory to the covenant, you are bound to do that.
Yes.
Public trust.
Public trust
doctrine.
And now it has been incorporated in the Green Tribunal
Green
Act.
Tribunals Act.
It's a statutory provision in the Green Tribunals Act
Section
now.
20 of the, but not only that, sustainable development.
Sustainable development is a part
Polluters
of
pay
the
principle.
statutory
Polluters pay
provisions.
principle, etc. were unknown to Indian jurisprudence. And similarly, the precautionary principle. All these were evolved by the Supreme Court when mainly we have to thank the Tirumulpad, Govardhan Tirumulpad as well as MC Mehta for evolving such things, because they are the fathers of the protector of environment. Even the definition of forest has been evolved in Godavarman's case by the Supreme Court. Say whenever in a grammatical sense it is a green area, having a larger area, then you will have to treat whether whatever the nomenclature provided in the act and the Forest Conservation Act will be applicable, and you will have to get permission from the department for the purpose of non-forest purpose. So that is how even the environmental jurisprudence
kept alive through continuing process.
Yes.
Mandamus.
So that was how the jurisprudence has been evolved by the Green Bench in the Supreme Court also. So only when the proactive judges who are able to interpret the law in such a way that we can save, save the country and save the environment also. That way, that is always required. So you'll have to evolve principles of justice, and that will have to be done. So it's a very nice hearing from you, Dr.
Thank you.
On the subject where this is required, in fact.
We have a couple of questions that's coming up. Maybe start with Advocate A.S. Dilip.
I don't have any question as such, but my only thing is only those officers or justices live up to or deliver their judgment based on their judicial standards would be worth calling justice. Otherwise, they will be called as justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilip sir, for that comment. Now coming to Nawaz Jan, please.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, Kaul sir.
Thank you.
First of all, I wanted to place on record sincere gratitude and appreciations to Advocate Shyam Patman, since I have happened to read a newspaper report today of the century of this session. Such a wonderful report the newspaper has given with due prominence and importance.
I think only in Kerala papers.
And coming to
probably in Calicut edition.
No, not in Calicut. It is not in Calicut.
Or Ernakulam edition.
No, I think what I could see today was somebody forwarded me a Kollam edition.
I see.
it is being circulated here also in Calicut. Also, it is being circulated.
Calicut also, okay.
Yes. And
as partners in this platform, we can all be proud that at least we are being given due recognition for our efforts. Like, it's great.
Exactly. And thank you very much for bringing Dr. Kaul sir again for our session.
We should be thankful to him for accepting our invitation.
He has become an inseparable part of this.
Absolutely, and he has got a very good fan also now. That is Mrs. Ramkumar sir also.
Yes.
In fact, the question what I was aiming at asking was already covered by Justice Ramkumar sir, but still I have a few apprehensions. Before that, when Justice Abraham Matthew sir had introduced the topic, he made a very beautiful metaphoric language. Lotus from the mud, without touching the mud. So that should be like lotus from the mud, lotus that emerges from the mud without the touch of the mud. That was so beautiful. And Dr. Kaul sir has said that the rules are made by legislatures and standards are evolved. Standards are discretionary and standards are influenced by social political factors. And rules are bony skeleton, and standards supply the blood and flesh to it. So beautifully explained, which gives insight to us. Now, I am coming to my question. Question as Justice Ramkumar sir has rightly asked. Sir, these days, as an FIR is lodged, right from the lodging of the FIR, the media reporters reach the spot with their crew and camera, and they follow like anything without knowing the ABC of the CRPC or without knowing the method of investigation or collection of evidence. They themselves hold trials by evening. Even before a primary report is filed before the magistrate, they hold trial in the media and they defame and they rather finish that person concerned. It is absolutely victimization of media and victimization of persons who have been alleged with some charges. But it is pitiable to see that such persons who have been falsely implicated into certain cases due to ulterior motives, what is the fate of them? Who is going to rescue them? In this case, whereas Dr. Kaur sir has rightly said the standards are evolved discretionary, influenced by social political factors, etc., why can't judges look into such things and and should take some corrective measures to see that a person who is charged with some allegations are not unnecessarily harassed. I should say that it is violative of even Article 21. His right to life is being violated. He has got a wife and children at home. He has got friends and fraternities at home. That person in whose behalf not even a charge sheet is filed, he is being defamed like anything. He is being finished like anything. At the end of the day, if this person is left scot-free, if he was acquitted by the competent court, can the media take back all these things? Can the media take back all these derogatory remarks? Can the media take back the mud thrown on his face? No. So, with the standards of the judges or the court, these aspects, can they ever consider these aspects of avoiding a media trial, or at least in matters which are sub judice, shall not be permitted to be discussed in the media?
There was a report, 200th Law Commission report of Justice Jagannath Rao, who had dealt with this whole matter of media trial versus fair trial. And it had also given a bill. Yeah. It had prepared a bill, you know. And there was also courts could grant a stay against the media. That is, during this period, you could not report those matters in the media. But I think that has still not become the law. That has still not become the law. So that
there were so many judicial verdicts by Supreme Court.
Yes.
That during investigation, the investigating officer shall not leak out the details of investigation to the media. Media shall not collect investigation details from the police. But it is blatantly violated.
Therefore, this
only
is
speculations, sir. Only speculations. They are spreading like anything.
Now, this is bad. This should not happen because this jeopardizes the fair trial and fair investigation so far as the accused is concerned.
Because in their right for bringing the news faster, they are losing the content. They are losing the veracity of the news. So there is a
vying with each other. They are vying with each other.
Among the channels. Who will bring the news first? Who will update first? And these updations are based on only speculations and presumptions. So, as Justice Ramkumar sir has rightly said, the presumption of innocence, that doctrine is being defeated here. Rather, it is an assumption of being guilty that is being highlighted. Once an FIR is lodged, he is stamped as an accused or rather a convict, because media itself delivers the judgment.
Yeah.
We have. So,
Now, one more
they are
thing.
waiting.
Are we not responsible for that? Because there are certain group among the lawyers going to the media and criticizing the way in which investigation is being done. Why Bar Council should not come and say that should not be done, because that is, you are interfering with the investigation. So we must also take care, and the community as such will have to fight against this. Unless this is done, I don't think that they will go on.
The problem is media are the makers and the breakers. Media support is necessary for anyone to come up in the society. So for that purpose, they are the makers. The moment you are involving into an open conflict with media or encounter with the media, we are finished.
No, that is wrong. That presumption is wrong, Mr. Nawaz. You will have to fight against injustice, because that is the reason why you are wearing the robe. We are wearing the robe.
Fighting against injustice is absolutely necessary. That is our maiden duty, all of us. But
anyway, Nawaz, sir, let us not deviate our topic from this to chastising the media. That we'll take up when we deal with press and the media as such. Today, you made your point. That of course, sir. And
no, that's a reality. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. You are absolutely correct. We don't even for a second have any quarrel.
No, we need the presence of media. We need the presence of media, without which people will not come to know. People will not be informed at all of anything. Gone are the days of the domination of print media. Visual media are necessary, but certain reasonable restrictions have to be imposed upon them. That is what I am asking.
They have become very powerful, and like the old saying goes, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, because everybody is dependent upon them, so they tend to be a bit, going overboard. Venki, you got a question? Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, I am Venki here. Thanks, sir. Thanks for me the opportunity. Sir, I actually learned many things today. Sir, actually, I had an opportunity of working in the interfacing of what you called technology with doctrines, test, and principles in different domains, specifically in patents. What I learned is that we have to go for a different approach from the subjective to objective approach, actually. So what you understand is, whatever the test or doctrines, whatever we are proposing for the new understanding the new issues, we find it is thoroughly different result when we shift from subject to objective type, as well as interfacing of different from logic to fuzzy logic concept in a way. So that gives a different approach and different result. This is what I find. And one more interesting thing is, sir, what we understand is the how to choose the specific doctrines or specific test or any principles. How to fix to that is a very challenging things when we are emerging in different domains altogether, sir. This is what I understand. Please could you shine some light on this one, sir?
No, I'm only saying that one has to keep oneself, not only in touch with the law as it has evolved here, but also the law as it has evolved in other jurisdictions also. And once you try to look at the comparative study of the law, like we did relating to Rellin versus this case of fault liability to no fault liability to absolute liability, So unless we go to the English cases, we will not be able to build up a good jurisprudence in India. But then India has also, now when it comes to the absolute liability, India has evolved itself, but then background remains the same common law jurisdiction countries where they have evolved this kind of I think it's a question of experience, as in when you grow in this subject, you start laying your hand on appropriate literature, comparable literature. I think it will come in the course of time. But I think it is a very important thing to go beyond the statute. It's very important to go to the judicial decisions on the subject. How the law has, historical development of the law, I think is very important that we cannot forget.
So basically the realization that law is not static but organic. Yes, that should be first understood.
Dynamic, it has to,
dynamic, yeah.
And the judicial standards have to change, keep on changing, evolving, modifying. But the question is that law is not only what is written in the statute books, it is beyond that. That is what I wanted to say.
Absolutely.
The justice content in law. to be
Yes.
discovered.
Correct, sir.
Thank
We
you.
have,
Thank you.
thank you, Venki. We have Ajita with a question. Ajita CG, can you just put the question? Unmute yourself.
Sorry. No question. That mistake. Sorry. Sorry.
It's okay. I saw your hand raised. That's right.
Yes. So that. Sorry.
It's absolutely okay. Now, as we come to the conclusion of this very pertinent and important topic, I'd like to know the thoughts of Prem also. Prem, please.
Well, it was an excellent class, and I would just say, as Cicero said it, the good of the people is the chief law. And by the way, counsel, let me first ask you, what exactly is judicial process? See, at its very best, how can you define judicial process? Maximum.
No, I think what I would, in the context in which I was deciding, discussing today, what is the raw material that goes in the mind of the judge, right?
The processing
And,
that is happening in the brain.
Yeah, what is the processing that is happening there, you know?
And final product that comes
Final product should emerge, very good product, and final product depends upon not only what you feed, but then how he uses that material for the purpose of giving a good result. That is where I would like to say, in the context of what we said, everything that has to do with the decision making
Is judicial process.
is judicial process.
So that means, in short, it is a way the judge reaches a decision. Not
Only the judge, how we assess. That's what in my my submission was also from the very beginning, that it is all the stakeholders. You see, how do you improve the system? That's what I always say. When you talk about judicial education, we don't talk about judicial education of only judges. We have to educate even the lawyers, we have to educate the prosecutors, we have to educate the investigators, everybody who has a role in the decision-making process or giving the material to evolve.
But the ultimate role is that of the judiciary.
That is why, we said Bangalore principles. I think I did not touch Bangalore principles are what Justice Ibrahim Matthew said. Then there are broad objectives. What broad objectives of judicial education is impartiality, competence, efficiency, effectiveness, community confidence in the judiciary.
Correct.
Community confidence is the most important thing. You see, if India judiciary today is getting still the respect that it is getting better than other judiciaries across the world, it's because people have that confidence in the people. Judges have to work harder to see that confidence remains there. That confidence. You see, I would not like to go to the court, but I have still a lot of respect for the court.
So, but actually, first, I think you were first referring to the case of Donoghue versus Stevenson.
Yes.
Right. But now, even I would say, because there was another famous case, Marbury versus Madison.
Yes, that was the first judicial review.
First one.
I did not want to go to those. I just wanted to say what common things they know. The cases that they have dealt with, which are every day dealt with by our lawyers. I didn't want to take them to the areas that, they may not have ventured.
Let me ask you one thing.
You see, that was one of the best judges, I think, of Justice Marshall.
Exactly. He was
and in fact, that remains to be a book of all times to read,
Correct.
There are judgments of the day, the books of the day, books of all times. It's only the books of all times that matter,
Correct.
You read a newspaper every day, you read some judgments every day. But then you don't read the judgments the way you read Justice Vivian Bose, the way you would read other judges when you talk about criminal law, Justice Sarkaria, other people, Those are the people whose judgments really made a lot of contribution to the literature and jurisprudence of the subject.
At the same time, at the cost of judicial process, I'm repeating those words, at the cost of judicial process, or maybe under the semblance of judicial process, don't you feel that the judiciary at times assert the function of the other organs of the state?
They overreach. Is that what you want to say? They overreach. I mean, it's a very debatable question. We should have a one more seminar on that. what are overreaches? You know, some people have said that even the judgments which
Also, but
Vishaka, no
not,
Vishaka,
not only Vishaka, Vishaka at least we can
no,
understand.
I mean, some people say, of course, it was very essential for exercising right to employment, freedom, the fundamental right to equality in the matter of employment, that they should have a good environment in which they should not be harassed, they should work. So therefore, it was something which was necessary. But then there are people, I said we should have a separate topic on that. What is judicial overreach and what is judicial activism?
For example, I would just tell you, because by see, at least by traditional standards, which of course we are governed by the constitution. Now the court, even the Supreme Court, has clearly gone beyond what is provided by the constitution. Just see the Khatri's case. I'm referring to the 85 Khatri 3.
I think as long as the judiciary, this is my answer to your question. My answer to your question is this: primary function to make law is of the legislature.
True.
But that should remain with the legislature. But ancillary power of the court to fill in the gaps should continue with the courts, because people will be without remedies. That is where standards will not evolve.
True.
For evolving standards to fill the gaps between the law and justice. That's what I said, After all, absolute liability came as a fill the gap, because Rellin versus Fletcher had exceptions.
Exactly.
And we did not want to have the exceptions to the absolute liability. They would say sabotage. Sabotage would have been one of those defenses that they would have pleaded. So we wanted to foreclose all defenses. We said once this has happened, mere fact that it has happened is sufficient to bring in industrialization, effect of industrialization. You have brought inherent danger on the land, and if this inherent danger escapes, you are liable, no defenses at all available to you. So this is evolution of new standards, which ultimately took the form of Public Liability Act.
True.
And therefore, legislation takes a lead, does not take a lead, it follows the judiciary.
True. But see.
But that is where the legislature sleeps and does not come up with solutions. Judges have to give answer to the questions.
Judges have to give answer if it is the legislative, vacuum. But see, even in India, we have been seeing in a number of judgments, what we call a court, it's a court of law. And there is a famous saying by Holmes Jr., Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., that what you call is a court of law and not a court of justice. And in the sarcasm also, it generates and fuels the impulse that the court to become the court of justice instead of being a court of law. So setting wrong, that of course, right is theoretically it is the function of the executive. But for the what I call for the far too long, it has become almost like dysfunctional. And the people also, they were also groping for the ray of hope from somewhere. And they found it in judiciary, of course. But that has led to judicial activism as well. The court cannot fault. The court is not expected to fault.
Let us take the case of 2013 amendment to the IPC. We always felt that when an amendment is made to the criminal law, it must be thoroughly examined and re-examined, because it brings in, challenge to the liberties of the people. But you see how much time was taken in debating those amendments. Nothing. Government was pleasing the galleries. It took a bill, did not read it, pass it, and go. And if this is the havoc the legislature plays, judges have onerous job, difficult job to perform.
Yes.
One, they have to smoothen the edges of the law. Second is they have to dispense justice and to see that Article 20, 21, 22 all are respected, So therefore, our problem is that legislature says that it is let the judges do it, we will not do it. Who stops you from making the law? If the matter is pending before the Supreme Court, you pass a law and say that now it has become infractious, we made the law.
Sir, actually, even if we go like that, let me just ask you one thing. Now, one of the most famous cases which we have is a triple talaq judgment in Shahiro Banu case. A landmark judgment, checking into the, what you call the constitutional validity of the triple talaq. That was
I read the judgment.
No, just let me ask you. The bench consisted of 5 judges.
5
region. 5 different. First, that suggests that the Supreme Court itself was on a somewhat like a defense mechanism. Somewhat. Let it be like that. Now, the opening judgment, of course, by Justice Kehar and the Justice Iqbal.
Minority. Nazir Ahmed. Justice Nazir Ahmed. Yeah.
Now, see, the Justice Nariman speaking for himself and Justice Ledit, they declare it as unconstitutional on the ground of violation of fundamental rights.
14.
That is 2 judges. Now the 3rd judge was Kurian Joseph, who wrote the 2nd judgment. Now he would say it is on the grounds that it is against the teachings of the Quran. See the difference of opinion. Ultimately, they reach at the same conclusion. But
He does not bring in Article 14.
Extremely different. So this is a very interesting aspect, because the difference of opinion among the judges, and just see what was the difference of opinion in its nutshell, whether if the essential religious practice.
Yeah, he said it is not an essential religious practice. Yeah.
Now the same thing came up before Shabarimala. It was so easy.
Yes.
So easy. Just see, when the case of Shahiro Banu comes, Supreme Court takes a different view. When the case of Shabarimala comes, Supreme Court goes on to interpret it in a different manner. Because there is a story actually of a farmer. A farmer, after he was coming out from his land, and he saw his wife in a compromising position with some stranger, and he committed murder of that stranger as well as his wife, and he was prosecuted for homicide. Now his trial commences before a particular judge. Now this particular judge, he found his hero in this particular farmer, because actually the judge himself was doubting the fidelity of his own wife. So that judge acquits the particular farmer. State goes in appeal before another judge. He was of a different view. Now what his view was, even if that be so, it was only for a divorce, he should have moved, not to kill. And he reverses the acquittal. See, this all depends upon the personal outlook of the judges. Judicial process, it is very...
That is why we said first judicial training.
But sir, how far judicial training can help? We have judicial training everything. But how far? After all, see, judicial officers, they must be cognizant of the fact that they are humans who are discharging divine functions. Yes. They have to realize that aspect first. It is without realizing that particular thing, they are put into action. Even though they are having training, everything. I don't think, because after all, we are all humans, we are all prone to her, maybe. Anyway, so it was a wonderful class, wonderful lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Bhushan sir, there was another incident that is usually narrated. Persons in yellow jersey playing against white jersey. You don't have any sort of affiliation to anybody. But during the course of the match, automatically you start aligning with either yellow or white.
Yeah,
I mean, end of the day, this impartiality, etc., those things are all abstract principles.
No, this is what we say. You can never remove bias, but you can minimize bias.
Exactly.
The effort has to be, judges' bias must be minimized.
In fact, one session judge was criticized for his judgment, which started with gruesome, dastardly murder, etc. That was the judgment started. And the High Court judge said, you are a prejudged, you have prejudged the whole thing. And the session judge asked him, sir, by the time the entire evidence is over, and I settle down for judgment, am I not prejudged? Am I not prejudiced in one way or the other? After the entire evidence is over and I settle down for judgment, I will be prejudiced in favor of one party or the other. That is inevitable.
The judgment, his decision does not come in the last line. It starts from the beginning itself. So for that matter, there is a division bench ruling of our High Court Kerala High Court, which starts, the first syllable is that this case reminds us of the cavage doctor.
Yes.
And saying, going the extent of he uses his primitive instruments, and the anesthetist stands by with a club, like patient if he shows any signs of consciousness. The first line of the
What about the observation by Supreme Court? Counterfeiters all over India, all over world, go to Kerala. Paradise for counterfeiters. That is how the judgment started.
Let us be realistic. Let us be practical. This is a system man by man. So all those things that the weaknesses, the what do you call affiliations, thoughts, patterns, everything that will also be carried to the process also. Yes, Prem, you want to add something?
Yeah, actually, I think we need one more session for this particular topic itself. Why? Because in this particular topic, again, there is something else also which we have to deliberate upon. Just see, nowadays, we can see that the judicial officers has virtually become a heritable property. If not a partible property. If it is heritable, it can be partible also. Nowadays, it has become a heritable property. That also.
We can call Matthew. Prem, we can call Matthew Nedumbara also.
That of course.
Then that would be contempt also. Because without touching that particular contempt and all, because that also has to be deliberated. Because judicial process has its own reach on those areas as well. Isn't it?
No, Prem, one thing. Ultimately, what is the purpose of justice delivery system? Then they can say law delivery system. They say the justice delivery system only because law is intended for the purpose of advancing social justice and substantial justice.
Correct.
So you must understand the difference between law and justice. That will make it itself is a debatable one. Whether law is law, justice or justice is law.
Law as an instrument of justice. Yeah.
Then again, Ramashan sir, there is an issue. If we are to modulate in each and every case saying that it's for the ends of justice in the larger interest of justice, then there is no finality. There is no, everybody will be scared to go to a court of law because we don't know what exactly
what will happen, what will the concept of the law justice.
And moreover, sir, it is what you call the rule of law. Nobody says the rule of justice. And even after having had great jurists like, say, what counsel said, like Hart, like Salmon, whatever, Bentham, whoever. Now, kindly tell me which exactly is the exact definition of justice. You have various examples of law.
Yeah.
Do you have a correct definition of the word justice?
Chancellor's foot.
So you have to have judicial standard for that.
Chancellor's foot.
You have to have judicial standard for that. Yeah.
Nobody dare to define. Why? Why? Because everybody knows at the end of the day, one person's justice would be another person's injustice.
Yes.
Because this is a concept which varies from person to person.
Very, very true.
Very true. Raman sir wanted to add something. He has put a hand up.
Good evening to all, sir. Sir, we are all Mofussil Court advocates. We don't have much law relating to constitution. Anyway, sir, one book, Dr. Nauram Sanajoba, Law and Society, he is the former Dean of Faculty of Law, Gauhati University. And
very good, very good.
Strategy of Policy Choice 2001. He has stated, you might have known, sir, our Indian Supreme Court has been skating on thin ice while interpreting the laws visibly against the Indian poor. So while interpreting various laws for the poor in the country, our Indian Supreme Court has been skating on thin ice. and in deep sympathy for the zamindars, landlords, big business and capitalists. What is your opinion, sir?
Very difficult question, but I think I always say it that you could see two, during when the Supreme Court was evolving, you could see two trends in the Supreme Court. One trend was to protect the property of the people. Second was to promote the rights of the working class. Because for the working class, money would go from somebody else's pocket. For zamindari, it will go from your pocket. So abolition will mean everybody.
That's what our VR Krishna are once said. The higher courts purpose Bambus the higher and the pauper is the lawyer, sir.
No, I was just saying in a lighter way. But question is,
our justice would have known this. Bambus the higher and pauper is the jury. We are all Mofussil Court advocates.
Justice Krishna even observed that the judgment of the Supreme Court is final because there is no further appeal.
Yes, yes.
Otherwise,
You see, by
had there been a
evolving
further appeal.
Hura's case itself is a judicial standard that judges are not infallible.
Correct. And just see a second review.
Curative petition.
Curative. Oh, my goodness.
And
But
also,
sir, at the same time, with your kind permission, in our place, various persons even name their child with very great judges whenever they rendered valuable. When the Allahabad judgment was rendered, one official person gave his child his name as Sinha, and various judges. And at the time when the statute of N.C. Chakla was in, and the base of the statute, the judge, the law, and the humankind. You would have heard, sir. The exact words on the base of the M.C. Chakla statute.
Yeah.
thank you, Shankaraman sir. Thank you for that insightful remarks. So for that matter, we have that Justice Arjit Prasad's committee report regarding the functioning of the consumer forum. Just if you go through that, sir, it is an eye-opener in the manner in which the presiding officers are selected, how it is functioning. That it is submitted before the Supreme Court, I believe. And with those, I believe that we can come to the end of the 98th session of Legal Empowerment Through Interaction lecture series. In the 99th session tomorrow, we have Justice R. Raghunandan Rao. He is the judge of the High Court of Andhra Pradesh. He'll be dealing with the subject, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code and Overview. Today, we are indebted to Justice Matthew sir for the introduction of the topic. Professor Dr. Tilak, Dr. Kaul sir, who is part of our family, but still the wonderful way in which, without getting into any controversy, dealing with the subject, and of course, Ramakrishnan sir, your valuable presence and inputs. In fact, wonderful sir to hear you present whatever be the subjects, the way you present, the passion in which you presented something, the energy that comes out when you present the topic, it's something that we'll also like to learn. And I mean, no way anybody can lose interest in the subject. Even if you say something that has got nothing to do with the law, I think politics also.
Keeping everyone spellbound.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. The kind of energy that comes when the class starts and till the end you maintain it. That is something.
That is a good teacher in him.
Thank you very much.
So, sir, thank you very much for being part of this journey.
Thank you.
Till we meet again in the 99th session tomorrow. Please do take care and stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.